So now let's look at how to create a preferences activity in order to be able to use this main preferences screen or layout that we created. All we have to do this is create an activity that inherits from a preference activity. So we can go into new, we can choose a new class, and we can do main preference activity. And then we can make it inherit from preference activity, which is an Android class that allows us to use the preferences that we declared in that layout. So we'll click finish here, and then just like the other activities, we're going to overload the onCreate. And then what we'll need to do here is actually load up our preferences XML. So the way that we do that is basically after our onCreate here, we're going to use a method that is add preferences from resource. And then we're going to specify the resource file, which is r.xml.mainPreferences. And that's really all there is to it. It's super easy to add preferences. Now, we still need to get to this activity, so we're going to kind of cheat here right now. And remember in our main activity that we have this click button on the enter hooked up to the help class. Well, we're going to switch this so that it's now hooked up to the main preference activity. And so now when we click that enter button, it's going to take us to that preferences screen. So we'll be able to see that we have that preferences screen hooked up and see our preferences. Now when we get to one of the later modules, I'm going to show you how to use a menu, and then we'll properly hook this up so that our preferences is coming off of a menu. But for now, we're just going to do this. Before we launch the application, there is one more thing that we'll need to do, which remember, we just added this new main preference activity. We need to add this to the manifest. So if we go into our Android manifest file, we can see here we need this main preferences activity added. And I've went ahead and added this here already, but let's make sure this is set up correctly. It should be main preference activity. So now we have it added to the manifest. So now we should be able to launch our application. And you can see here I've launched our application. We're going to go ahead and click the enter button. And we know that that's now taking us to the preferences screen. And you can see here we have our preference. It's called grams per day. And when we click this, we get this dialog popping up, protein per day, and it says enter grams of protein. And so we can put in 100 here and then click OK. And now this is saved. And if we go back, let's say we leave the application and then we go back into the application, protein tracker. Now you can see grams per day, and when we click this, we have our 100 saved there. So what's happening is Android is taking care of all of the hard work for us by automatically storing and saving those values. So what we've done here, just to recap, is we've created a new preferences activity, and we've just loaded up this preferences screen, and then Android is taking care of everything else for us. So this is a really simple way. It's not hard to do preferences in Android if you use the preferences layout and then use the preferences activity. And there's just one more topic I want to talk about with the preferences, which is using an on-preferences change listener in order to listen for changes in preference. And this is something that you might commonly want to use if you have a preferences screen, and when the preference changes, you want to be able to do something like to disable a certain other preference. So I'll just give you an example right here. If we have a preference object, we'll just call it P. And if you do P dot on set on preference change listener, it allows us to have, just like we did for the button clicks, a listener. And so I'll create this on preference change listener, and I'll just make this a field. And then here I'll create a new, this interface for on preference change listener. And you can see it has one method that we have to implement, and it's on preference change. And all this does is pass in the preference that changed and then what the value is. And you'll have to cast this to the correct type. But this is just, without going too deep into this, just a simple hook that you have that would allow you to do something when a preference changes. And once you set this up on a preference, then whenever that preference changes, it's going to call your hook.